The desperate call. The emergency beacon cut through the peaceful hum of the Galactic Trade Council chambers, like a knife through silk. Ambassador Nira Veltar stood at the speaker's podium, her silver skin dulled with exhaustion, and her large, violet eyes reflecting a terror that made even the most hardened council members shift uncomfortably. The Zilari were known throughout the galaxy as master engineers and peaceful traders, their floating cities above the clouds of Zilari Prime, serving as neutral ground for diplomatic meetings between hostile species. Now, those same cities burned. Honored representatives, Nira began, her melodic voice cracking with strain. My people face complete annihilation. The Morgoth Syndicate has invaded our home system with a fleet of 80 warships. They demand our submission, our technology, and our lives. The holographic display above the chamber flickered to life, showing devastating footage from Zilari Prime. Sleek silver cities that had floated gracefully in the clouds for millennia now fell like dying birds, their anti-gravity systems destroyed by concentrated plasma fire. Council Chairman Vextor, a four-armed Altarian with orange carapace, consulted his data tablets with deliberate slowness. The Galactic Trade Council was not a military organization, its members primarily concerned with trade routes, taxation, and commercial disputes. Military intervention was rarely discussed and even more rarely approved. Ambassador Veltar, Chairman Vextor replied in his clicking dialect, the Morgoth Syndicate operates outside Council jurisdiction. While we sympathize with your situation, our authority extends only to registered trade territories. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Most representatives nodded sagely, already calculating how Zilari trade routes might be redistributed after the inevitable conquest. Nira's composure finally cracked. Sympathize. Her voice rose to a near shriek. 30 million Zilari civilians are trapped in burning cities. The Syndicate is using our children as shields while they strip mine our technological databases. They have given us 72 standard hours to surrender completely, or they will begin systematic orbital bombardment of all population centers. The holographic display shifted to show Morgoth Syndicate vessels, dark wedge-shaped ships bristling with weapons that had terrorized a dozen systems. Director Cole Morgoth himself appeared on screen, his cybernetic implants gleaming as he delivered an ultimatum to the Zilari government. His scarred face showed no emotion as he outlined terms that amounted to total slavery for any survivors. Representative Glix of the Centaurian Commerce Guild raised one of his 6 arms. What military assets do the Zilari possess? Surely your people maintain some defense forces. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Every civilized species was expected to maintain basic security, though most relied on hired mercenaries or mutual defense pacts. Nira's head drooped in shame. We have 4 orbital platforms with light defensive systems and perhaps 200 civilian vessels that could be armed. The Zilari have not fought a war in 800 years. We believed commerce and diplomacy had replaced the need for violence. The admission of military weakness drew uncomfortable silence from the assembled representatives. Chairman Vextor finally spoke after consulting with his advisors. The Council can authorize emergency trade sanctions against the Morgoth Syndicate and provide medical supplies for refugee assistance. We can also offer diplomatic intervention if Director Morgoth agrees to negotiations. The offer was pathetically inadequate, and everyone in the chamber knew it. Trade sanctions would take months to have any effect. Medical supplies could not stop plasma bombardments, and the Syndicate had never agreed to diplomatic negotiations with anyone. Medical supplies? Nira stared at the chairman with disbelief. You offer bandages while my world burns? The Syndicate has 80 warships in our system. They are not interested in trade agreements or diplomatic protests. They want our technology and our lives in that order. Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried clearly through the vast chamber. We need military intervention. We need someone to fight. The uncomfortable shuffling of representatives filled the silence. Fighting was something other species did, something primitive and barbaric. Civilized beings resolved conflicts through economic pressure, diplomatic compromise, and committee meetings. The idea of actually deploying warships to fight other warships was distasteful to most council members. In the back of the chamber, Captain Elena Torres of the Human Colonial Authority sat quietly observing the proceedings. Humans were relatively new to galactic civilization, having made first contact only 12 years earlier when their exploration vessel Endeavour encountered a Zalari trading ship near the edge of human space. The meeting had been peaceful and profitable, leading to formal diplomatic relations and limited trade agreements. Torres had been silent throughout the session, taking notes on a simple electronic tablet while other representatives debated sanctions and refugee protocols. Most council members barely noticed the human representative, considering her species too new and too primitive to contribute meaningfully to galactic affairs. Humans came from a Class 9 death world called Earth, with gravity, weather, and wildlife that would kill most civilized species within hours. Such harsh origins typically produced violent, unstable cultures unsuited for advanced diplomatic work. What the council members did not know was that Captain Torres was not merely a diplomat. She was a decorated combat veteran of the Outer Colony, Wars, a conflict that had shaped human expansion into space through 20 years of brutal fighting against separatist factions. Her calm demeanor and simple uniform concealed extensive military experience and direct communication links to the Human Colonial Defense Command. As the debate continued, Torres quietly activated her secure communication system and began transmitting a priority message to Earth. The message was brief and direct, following standard human military communication protocols. The content was simple. Ally in distress, overwhelming enemy force, request immediate assistance. She included all tactical data available about the Morgoth Syndicate fleet, Zalari defensive capabilities, and estimated civilian casualties. Chairman Vextor was still outlining the Council's limited response options when Torres stood and walked toward the exit. Her movement was so quiet and unremarkable that only Ambassador Nira noticed her departure. The Zalari diplomat watched the human leave with desperate eyes, wondering if this final potential ally was also abandoning her people to their fate. Torres paused at the chamber exit and turned back to address Ambassador Veltar directly. "Ma'am, humans have protocols for emergency assistance requests. Your message has been received and will be forwarded to the appropriate authorities." Her voice was calm and professional, giving no indication of the storm of activity her message would soon trigger throughout human space. The message from Captain Torres reached Earth's Colonial Defense Command headquarters on Luna within 4 hours, transmitted through quantum entanglement communication networks that spanned hundreds of light years. Admiral Marcus Chen was reviewing fleet deployment schedules in his office when the priority alert appeared on his personal communication system. As commander of the 5th Battle Group, Chen received dozens of routine messages daily, but this one carried classification codes he had not seen since the Proxima incident 3 years earlier. Chen read Torres's report twice, then activated his secure link to Fleet Command Central. The situation was clear. An allied species faced extinction from a numerically superior enemy force, with less than 3 days before systematic genocide began. The Galactic Trade Council had offered medical supplies and diplomatic protests. It was exactly the kind of half-measure response that humans found both predictable and infuriating. Admiral Sarah Mackenzie appeared on Chen's communication screen within minutes of his call. As Supreme Commander of Human Colonial Defense Forces, Mackenzie had earned her position through 30 years of military service, including command roles in every major human conflict since the Mars Rebellion. Her steel-gray hair and weathered features reflected decades of making life-and-death decisions under pressure. "Marcus, I've reviewed Torres's report," Mackenzie began without preamble. "The Zalari have been good allies to us. Their engineering technology helped us solve the atmospheric processing problems on New Geneva, and their neutral ports have been essential for our deep space exploration missions. We cannot allow them to be exterminated while we debate committee responses." Chen nodded, already pulling up fleet status reports on his secondary screen. The 5th Battle Group was currently conducting training exercises in the Sol system, making it the closest major human military formation to Zalari space. "The 5th Group can be ready for departure in 18 hours, he reported. "But Admiral, we're talking about 80 Syndicate warships. Even with our full battle group, the odds are not favorable." Mackenzie's expression did not change. In her experience, humans rarely faced favorable odds in military engagements. What mattered was not the balance of forces, but the determination to use those forces effectively. "Marcus, how many ships can you deploy immediately?" she asked, already knowing that the answer would determine human response to the crisis. Chen consulted his tactical displays, calculating every available vessel within range of the Zalari system. 12 heavy cruisers, 38 destroyers, 8 fast attack corvettes, and 4 carrier ships with full fighter complements. Total of 224 vessels if we include the fighters. He paused, realizing the implications of what he had just reported. "Admiral, that's our entire 5th battle group, plus reserve elements from the 3rd and 7th groups." For the first time in the conversation, Mackenzie smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Marcus, when humans receive a call for help, we respond appropriately. The Syndicate has 80 ships and expects to face whatever token force the Trade Council might scrape together. They are not prepared for 200 human warships arriving with orders to solve the problem permanently." She leaned forward, her voice taking on the steel that had made her legendary among human military personnel. "You have full authorization to deploy the combined battle groups to Zalari space. Rules of engagement are weapons-free against any Syndicate military assets. Priority is protection of Zalari civilians and infrastructure." The orders were transmitted throughout human space within the hour. At Luna Orbital Command, the massive carrier ships Yorktown and Lexington began taking on their full complements of fighters and assault craft. At Mars Defense Station, heavy cruisers and destroyers loaded, every missile and energy cell their magazines could hold. At the asteroid mining stations of the belt, fast attack corvettes received orders to abandon their patrol routes and rendezvous with the main fleet. Throughout the Sol system, alarms sounded as human military personnel rushed to their ships. This was not a training exercise or routine patrol deployment. This was a full battle group mobilization, with orders to engage and destroy a numerically inferior, but technologically dangerous enemy force. The difference between human military doctrine and that of most galactic species was about to become very clear to everyone involved. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of his flagship, the heavy cruiser Defiance, watching the controlled chaos of fleet preparation. His crew moved with efficiency born from years of training for exactly this scenario. They had drilled rapid deployment so many times that the real thing felt almost routine. What made this deployment different was not the preparation, but the destination and the stakes involved. Captain Lisa Park, Chen's chief of staff, approached with final departure reports. "All ships report ready for immediate departure, Admiral. Engineering estimates 26 hours to reach Zalari space at maximum hyperspace velocity." She paused, consulting her tablet. "Sir, that's pushing our drives well beyond normal operational parameters." Chen nodded, already aware of the technical challenges. Human ships were designed to be pushed hard when necessary, built by a species that understood the difference between optimal performance and emergency performance. "Captain, inform engineering that they have authorization to exceed normal safety margins. We need to reach Zalari space in 18 hours or less. Every hour we delay costs civilian lives." As the human fleet prepared for departure, similar mobilizations were occurring throughout the Colonial Defense Network. The defense forces at Alpha Centauri and Wolf 359 moved to high alert status, ready to respond if the Morgoth Syndicate decided to retaliate against human territories. Intelligence networks began gathering detailed information about Syndicate military capabilities, base locations, and command structure. Back at the Galactic Trade Council chambers, Ambassador Nira continued her desperate appeals to representatives, who offered sympathy but little substance. None of them noticed that the human representative had not returned to her seat. None of them knew that the largest human military formation ever assembled was racing through hyperspace toward a confrontation that would fundamentally change galactic understanding of what it meant to ask humans for help. The message sent back to Captain Torres was as simple and direct as the original request had been. "Help is coming. Advise Zalari civilians to remain in shelters. Estimated arrival in 18 hours. Torres received the message while still en route to the human embassy from the council chambers. She had expected acknowledgement of the request, perhaps an offer, to send medical supplies or refugee transport ships. What she got instead was confirmation that humans had a fundamentally different definition of appropriate response to calls for help. When other species calculated minimum viable assistance, humans calculated maximum possible intervention. The difference was about to become very clear to Director Cole Morgoth and his syndicate forces, who were about to learn that attacking human allies was a decision with severe consequences. When humans answer the call, Director, Cole Morgoth stood on the command deck of his flagship, the massive dreadnought Shadow's Edge, watching the systematic destruction of another Zalari floating city. The Morgoth Syndicate had perfected the art of conquest through 3 decades of expansion across the galactic rim, and Morgoth took personal pride in his efficiency. 17 systems had fallen under his command, their populations either enslaved or eliminated based on their usefulness to Syndicate operations. The Zalari had proven particularly valuable targets. Their anti-gravity technology could revolutionize Syndicate ship design, while their advanced manufacturing systems could produce weapons and equipment faster than any known industrial process. Morgoth had already identified the key research facilities and production centers that would be preserved after the conquest. Everything else could burn. Director, his communications officer reported from her station below the command platform, "We are detecting multiple hyperspace signatures approaching the system. Sensors indicate at least 40 contacts, possibly more." The officer's voice carried a note of concern that made Morgoth turn from his tactical display showing burning cities. Morgoth considered this development with cold calculation. The Galactic Trade Council had finally responded to Zalari pleas for assistance, exactly as his intelligence networks had predicted. Their peacekeeping forces would arrive, make diplomatic protests about civilian casualties, and eventually withdraw when faced with superior Syndicate firepower. It was a pattern he had seen in a dozen previous conquests. Classifications and estimated arrival time, Morgoth demanded, already planning the brief engagement that would eliminate this minor irritation and send a clear message about interfering with Syndicate expansion operations. The communications officer consulted her displays, her expression growing confused. "Sensors indicate over 200 individual contacts, Director. They will drop out of hyperspace in approximately 8 minutes. She paused, rechecking her readings. "Sir, these readings cannot be correct. No single species maintains battle fleets of this magnitude." Morgoth felt the first stirring of unease. 200 ships was larger than any military formation he had encountered in 3 decades of warfare. Most civilized species maintained only token defense forces, relying on diplomatic solutions and economic pressure to resolve conflicts. The largest military response the Syndicate had ever faced was 37 ships from the Centaurian Defense League, and those had been easily destroyed through superior tactics and firepower. "Species identification," he ordered, moving to the primary sensor station to review the data personally. If someone had assembled a coalition fleet to oppose Syndicate expansion, he needed to know immediately. "Unknown, Director. The hyperspace signatures do not match any vessels in our intelligence database. Energy readings suggest heavy military construction, but we cannot identify the species responsible." The sensor technician's hands moved rapidly over his control surfaces, trying to extract additional information from the approaching fleet's emissions. This was significantly more concerning. The Morgoth Syndicate maintained the most comprehensive military intelligence database in known space, with detailed specifications on every warship design used by major powers. If these ships were not in their database, they represented either a completely unknown threat or technology so advanced that standard sensor analysis could not classify it properly. "Alert all ships to maximum combat readiness," Morgoth commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never lost a battle. "Deploy the fleet in defensive formation Delta. We will destroy these newcomers quickly and return to conquest operations." He had built the Syndicate through overwhelming force applied without hesitation. Whatever species had sent this fleet was about to learn the cost of opposing Morgoth expansion. The Syndicate invasion fleet moved with practiced efficiency. 80 warships arranged themselves in overlapping defensive positions designed to maximize their combined firepower against any approaching enemy. Each vessel bristled with weapons that had shattered the defenses of 17 worlds, their dark hulls bearing the scars and kill markings of countless victories. Morgoth had earned his position through 40 years of successful military campaigns. He understood that decisive action was the key to victory, and hesitation was the path to defeat. These newcomers would be given one opportunity to withdraw, then annihilated if they refused. It was the Syndicate way, and it had never failed him. The hyperspace distortions intensified as the unknown fleet prepared to enter normal space. Morgoth watched the tactical displays with growing fascination. In his experience, most species announced their arrival with diplomatic transmissions, demands for negotiation, or threats of military action. These ships maintained complete communication, silence their intentions unknown. Incoming vessels are dropping out of hyperspace now, the sensor officer announced. Director, I count 12 heavy cruisers, 38 destroyers, 8 fast attack corvettes, and 4 massive vessels that appear to be carrier ships. His voice carried growing concern as more contacts appeared on the tactical displays. Sir, the carrier ships are launching smaller craft. Hundreds of them. Morgoth studied the formation as it appeared on his screens. The ships were sleek and functional, built for war rather than intimidation. Their hulls were painted in the dull gray of military vessels with none of the decorative elements that most species use to display their power. What disturbed him most was their silence. No demands, no threats, no communication attempts of any kind. Open a communication channel, Morgoth commanded. Let us see who dares to interfere with Syndicate operations. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of what appeared to be the flagship of the unknown fleet. A human female in simple military uniform appeared, her brown eyes meeting Morgoth's gaze with calm determination. I am Admiral Marcus, Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Force, she began without preamble. You have attacked and invaded the sovereign territory of the Zalari Republic, our allies. You have exactly 60 seconds to begin withdrawing all forces from this system immediately. Morgoth laughed, the sound echoing through his bridge. Humans. He had heard intelligence reports about this recently contacted species. Primitive beings, from some distant death world who had barely achieved interstellar flight. The reports suggested they were technologically inferior and politically insignificant. I am Director Cole Morgoth of the Morgoth Syndicate, he replied, his voice carrying the authority of absolute power. You are in violation of legitimate Syndicate territorial claims. Withdraw immediately or face complete destruction. He gestured to his tactical officer, already preparing to demonstrate Syndicate superiority through overwhelming firepower. Chen's expression did not change. Director, you seem to misunderstand the situation. We are not here to negotiate or establish territorial claims. We are here to solve a problem. The problem is that you are murdering innocent civilians. We intend to solve that problem permanently. The communication channel closed before Morgoth could respond. He turned to his tactical officer with growing irritation. Target their largest vessels. We will make an example of these primitives and return to our conquest schedule. The idea that humans could pose a serious threat was absurd. Their fleet might be larger than expected, but quantity meant nothing against superior Syndicate technology and experience. Director, his sensor officer called out with growing alarm. The human vessels are moving into attack formation. Their energy signatures are unlike anything in our database. Sir, I think we may have seriously underestimated their capabilities. Morgoth was about to dismiss this concern when the human fleet opened fire. The first salvo of missiles and energy beams struck the Syndicate formation with devastating precision. 3 destroyers vanished instantly, their shields overwhelmed, and hulls vaporized by concentrated plasma fire. The coordinated nature of the attack demonstrated tactical sophistication that Morgoth had not expected from a primitive species. Return fire, he commanded, watching in shock as more Syndicate ships fell to human weapons. All units engage the enemy fleet immediately. The Syndicate warships began responding with their own weapons, massive energy beams and missile salvos that had destroyed hundreds of enemy vessels in previous battles. The human response was immediate and terrifying. Instead of engaging in the traditional long-range bombardment that characterized most space battles, the human fleet charged directly into close combat range. Their destroyers and corvettes moved with impossible speed and agility, weaving through Syndicate fire while delivering precise strikes against critical systems. "Director, we are losing ships faster than we can count," his tactical officer reported with panic creeping into his voice. "Human fighters are attacking our weapon systems with surgical precision. They are disabling our ships rather than destroying them outright." This was a new and disturbing development. Most species either destroyed enemy vessels completely or attempted to capture them intact. The humans were systematically disabling Syndicate weapons while leaving life support and navigation systems functional. Morgoth watched in horror as his carefully planned conquest began collapsing around him. The Shadow's Edge shuddered under repeated hits from human weapons, its shields failing under concentrated fire from 3 human cruisers. Throughout the battle, the humans maintained perfect formation discipline and communication. Their attacks coordinated with a precision that suggested extensive combat experience. "Sir, incoming transmission from the human flagship," the communications officer announced over the sound of exploding systems and emergency alarms. Admiral Chen appeared on screen again, her uniform now showing scorch marks from battle damage to her bridge. Behind her, human crew members worked calmly at their stations despite the ongoing combat. "Director Morgoth, you have one final opportunity. To surrender your forces. Continue fighting and we will be forced to destroy your remaining ships." "Surrender?" Morgoth snarled, his cybernetic implants sparking from battle damage. "The Syndicate does not surrender. We will fight to the last ship." He cut the communication and turned to his weapons officer. "Target their flagship. Concentrate. All remaining firepower on that vessel." The Shadow's Edge fired its main guns at the human flagship, massive energy beams that could crack a planet's surface. The beams struck the human ship's shields and simply dissipated, absorbed by defensive systems far more advanced than Syndicate intelligence had suggested. In response, the human flagship fired a single missile that struck the Shadow's Edge amidships, penetrating its armor and detonating inside the ship's primary weapon systems. Morgoth found himself thrown to the deck as his flagship lost power and began drifting helplessly through space. Emergency lighting flickered on, revealing a bridge, filled with smoke and sparking equipment. Around him, the remainder of his fleet was surrendering or being systematically disabled by human forces that had proven superior in every aspect of space combat. "Director," his communications officer whispered from her damaged station, "I am receiving reports from the surface. Human ground forces are landing at all major population centers. They are engaging our occupation forces while evacuating Zalari civilians to safety." She paused, listening to her earpiece. "Sir, our ground commanders are reporting that human soldiers are using non-lethal weapons against Syndicate personnel whenever possible. They seem more interested in preserving life than maximizing casualties." This final revelation broke something inside Morgoth's mind. Throughout his career, he had conquered through fear and overwhelming violence. The idea of an enemy that could destroy his forces while actively trying to minimize casualties was incomprehensible. These humans fought with a combination of technical superiority and moral restraint that no military doctrine had prepared him to counter. The battle ended 37 minutes after it began. Of the 80 Syndicate warships that had entered the system, 63 were disabled and captured while 17 had been destroyed when their crews refused to surrender. Not a single human vessel had been lost, though several showed battle damage from Syndicate weapons. On the surface of Zalari Prime, human marines moved through the floating cities with methodical efficiency. They used advanced, non-lethal weapons to incapacitate Syndicate occupation forces, while medical teams treated both human and alien casualties without discrimination. The precision of their operations was remarkable. They had liberated 3 major cities without causing significant damage to Zalari infrastructure or civilian populations. Ambassador Nira Veltar stood in the ruins of the Zalari Capitol building, watching human soldiers help evacuate wounded civilians to safety. Her violet eyes were wide with amazement and gratitude as she witnessed the most professional military operation in galactic history. These humans had traveled hundreds of light years to protect people they barely knew, risking their lives for a species that could offer them nothing in return. Admiral Chen's voice echoed through her communication device. Ambassador Veltar, Zalari space is secure. Syndicate forces have been neutralized or captured. We are beginning immediate humanitarian assistance operations for your displaced population. Admiral, Nira replied, her voice thick with emotion. How can we ever repay this debt? You saved our entire civilization. Chen's response was simple and direct, reflecting the practical nature of human military thinking. Ma'am, allies help each other. That's what makes them allies. The news of the human intervention reached the Galactic Trade Council within hours, transmitted by emergency communications networks throughout civilized space. The representatives who had offered medical supplies and diplomatic protests now faced the reality that humans had solved the crisis through overwhelming military force applied with surgical precision. Chairman Vextor called an emergency session to address the implications of human military capabilities. The council chambers buzzed with nervous energy as representatives struggled to comprehend what had occurred. A species they had dismissed, as primitive newcomers had deployed the largest battle fleet in recorded galactic history and used it to achieve total victory against a major military power. Captain Torres returned to her seat in the council chambers, her expression calm and professional. She had received detailed reports of the battle from Admiral Chen, including casualty figures and reconstruction requirements for the Zalari system. The human response had been exactly what she had expected: comprehensive, effective, and conducted with minimal loss of life on all sides. Captain Torres, Chairman Vextor addressed her directly, his voice carrying new respect and not a small amount of fear. The Council would like to understand human military capabilities and intentions. Your species has demonstrated power far beyond anything in our previous assessments. Torres consulted her notes before responding, her tone remaining diplomatic despite the changed circumstances. Chairman, humans maintain defense forces appropriate to protecting our territories and allies. We prefer diplomatic solutions to conflicts, but we are prepared to use military force when necessary to protect innocent lives. The understated nature of her response sent chills through the assembled representatives. 200 warships was apparently what humans considered appropriate for protecting allies. The implications for galactic power structures were staggering. Representative Glix of the Centaurian Commerce Guild raised one of his arms tentatively. Captain, what are human intentions regarding the former syndicate territories? Will your species be claiming these systems for expansion? The question reflected the fears of every council member, that humans might use their demonstrated military superiority to establish a galactic empire. The syndicate territories will be returned to their original inhabitants where possible, Torres replied matter-of-factly. Humans have no interest in conquest or expansion through military force. We prefer trade agreements and mutual defense pacts with willing partners. She paused, allowing the implications to sink in. However, we will not tolerate attacks against our allies or civilian populations. The session ended with more questions than answers, but one thing had become clear to every representative in the chamber. The galaxy had changed. Humanity had announced its presence not through diplomatic speeches or trade negotiations, but through the most decisive military victory in recorded history. They had demonstrated that when humans offered help, they meant all necessary help, regardless of cost or complexity. In the weeks that followed, the Zalari system underwent rapid reconstruction with human assistance. Engineering teams from Earth's colonies worked alongside Zalari specialists to rebuild the floating cities, incorporating improved defensive systems and emergency protocols. The partnership between humans and Zalari grew stronger, based on mutual respect and shared values. Director Cole Morgoth spent his remaining years in a human-administered prison facility, where he was treated with the same consideration given to any other prisoner. His requests for interviews with galactic media were denied, but he was provided with access to historical records that detailed human military conflicts. The reading material helped him understand how thoroughly he had misjudged his opponents. The Morgoth Syndicate dissolved within 6 months as its member worlds declared independence, or requested protection from human colonial forces. The age of expansion through conquest had ended not through diplomatic progress or economic pressure, but through the simple demonstration that some species would respond to aggression with overwhelming and precisely applied force. Throughout the galaxy, the lesson was clear. When you ask humans for help, you get exactly that. Help, in whatever measure is necessary to solve the problem completely. The difference between requesting assistance and receiving human assistance had become a distinction that would shape interstellar relations for generations to come.